Hello, and welcome to today's keynote on driving DEI systemic change, a conversation with Magda Yrizarry. My name is Anthony Sis, and I'm the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Learning Consultant in the Department of Inclusion and Workforce Diversity at Cornell University. Before we begin, I'd like to start with our land acknowledgement. Cornell University is located on the traditional homelands of the Gayokono, also known as the Cayuga Nation. The Gayokono are members of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, an alliance of 6 sovereign nations with a historic and contemporary presence on this land. The Confederacy precedes the establishment of Cornell University, New York State, and the United States of America. We acknowledge the painful history of Gayokono dispossession and honor the ongoing connection of Gayokono people, past and present, to these lands and waters. Now, I'd like to introduce our speakers. Angela Winfield is the Associate Vice President for Inclusion and Workforce Diversity at Cornell University and a Presidential Advisor on Diversity and Equity. In these roles, she provides leadership, vision, energy, and a unified philosophy to the university's diversity, inclusion, and workplace belonging efforts. Her expertise is in workplace diversity, and her specialty is in developing innovative and practical strategic initiatives focused on creating actionable change. She leads the university's affirmative action and federal contractor compliance program, manages the university's 5 identity and affinity-based colleague network groups, provides training opportunities for more than 7,000 staff, oversees religious accommodations, and serves on the university's ADA coordinator team. Magda Yrizarry is a Senior Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer at Verizon. As the SVP for Diversity and Employee Engagement, Magda develops strategies that infuse greater equity in Verizon's processes, behaviors, and operations to ensure that all employees have equal opportunity. She leads global initiatives to expand mentorship and development opportunities for women, people of color, LGBTQ, people with disabilities, and neurodiversity, as well as veterans. Magda's leadership has resulted in industry praise from Forbes, Women's Business Enterprise National Council, and Human Rights Campaign. She has been twice recognized as one of the 50 most powerful Latinas in America, a top executive in corporate diversity by Black Enterprise, and a President's Award recipient from the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce Foundation. Magda is a Big Red graduate and serves on the Cornell University Council and Cornell Mosaic. Magda's best accomplishment is being a mother to 3 bright, talented contributors to society. With that being said, I'd like to pass it on to Angela Winfield. Angela?
Thank you very much, Anthony, for that wonderful introduction, and welcome everybody. And welcome, Magda. Thank you so much for agreeing to speak with us today. I am absolutely thrilled to be chatting with you. So first, I just want to start off with a little bit about you and your background. Anthony gave us a flavor in your introduction, but would you mind sharing with us a little bit about your personal journey and your career path to be the CDO at Verizon? Tell us a little bit how you got into the DEI space.
Thank you, Angela and Anthony and Cornell, for the opportunity to be here with you. My journey all started at Cornell, just to shorten it a little bit, but it really did begin at Cornell. I have a master's in regional planning, and I left Cornell really with the intent of being an activist and being involved in social change. And in that planning capacity, I left and began to develop social welfare programs in a nonprofit. And it turned out that that nonprofit was funded by New York Telephone, a legacy company of today, Verizon. And at the time, I was brought in to establish some public-private partnerships between the corporation and primarily the state of New York at the time. And from there, I began a career in community relations, in external affairs, and corporate responsibility, and was afforded just lots of different opportunities to continue to be that advocate for change and for social justice, really as part of a team that really believed that we had an awesome opportunity and responsibility to share the power of technology with communities, across our operating footprint, from those who are rural to the urban centers, everything in between. And the sense of equity was very strong, and it's a strong part of the company. And so it aligned with me. And I thought I would be there 5 years, Angela, to just kind of learn how corporate America worked. And having been in a nonprofit, that I would learn and go back into nonprofit work and ultimately, public service. And I just believe that I have been able to serve in this space of equity at a company like Verizon. The last role that I had before coming into the role of Chief Diversity Officer was as a representative of our strategic alliances organizations like the Human Rights Campaign, like the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce or the NAACP, and really helping to connect the corporation's mission, vision, regulatory, and public policy agenda with the agenda that existed in those stakeholder communities as well, finding those places where we could combine mission and together make positive change. And so that's a quick.
Yes, thank you for that. And needless to say, and without dating or aging you, you've been at Verizon for well more than 5 years and have really made an impact and change in the time that you've been there. What has kept you at Verizon for as long as you've been there?
What keeps me at Verizon is the opportunity to make a meaningful contribution to the world. Sounds corny, but I think that we get to choose where we invest ourselves. And, it's great to be talking to the leadership, you, Anthony, others who are listening, who are part of the Cornell community. And I chose Verizon because my values and what was important to me aligned with the institutional values of Verizon. And I've not been disappointed in 31 years. We have seen many changes. Regulatory changes, technology changes, mergers and acquisitions. I've worked with 3 different CEOs now in the course of my leadership span, particularly in the space with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I can say that diversity, equity, and inclusion cannot rely on a personality. It has to be part of the real values and the business, the core strategy of the organization. And it was great to hear Anthony's introduction when he, paused to acknowledge where we sit as a physical Cornell and the history that existed in that space and that continues to exist on behalf of tribal nations. And so I hope that that's a reflection of a core value at Cornell. I believed it when I went to Cornell, and I thought of that amazing mission that says, we're going to create a place where people from all kinds of backgrounds are going to find the opportunity to grow and learn in all kinds of disciplines. I know I didn't quote that exactly right, but
close. You've got the essence of it. Any person, any study. Yes.
Any person, any study. That is powerful for a person like me who comes out of Brooklyn, New York, Bedford-Stuyvesant, the projects, to have been on the slope is equity in action. And I just really stayed at Verizon because it's not a slogan. It can't be a slogan. It has to permeate how we show up every day as an organization. And so that has kept me. Meaningful work with amazing people, all on purpose for something bigger than ourselves.
Absolutely. That resonates so deeply with me as well. I'm a core values-driven person and a core values-driven leader. And it's just refreshing and affirming to hear that from you, that, that you made the choice and that you choose where you are and that your personal values align with your organizational values in the work that you do and in the role that you do. That's wonderful. And that actually leads into something else that you mentioned about an organization really needing to know and understand and make DEI a part of the fabric of the work that they do, and it's not reliant on a single person or a personality. So I want to know more about that. Can you tell us what, in your opinion, is the role of a CDO in an organization, both at Verizon and generally?
I think I will speak to what I believe is applicable broadly, and yet each organization has to then make this real within the context of their industry, their company, academia, departments. It's important that this work be anchored in beyond the culture and values of the organization into every area of our work, meaning that when I think about all of our stakeholders, we have determined 4 stakeholders. Our employees are our stakeholders, right? And we have to think about diversity and inclusion, right? So we have to make sure that we are a place where all kinds of people can come, contribute to their fullest potential, grow, and come from all backgrounds. But if they can't really contribute and grow to their full potential, if they're invited and given a seat at the table, but don't have a voice at the table, then it's for naught. And so the employee as a stakeholder, the representation and the richness of diversity and the inclusive culture in which they live and work is important. The other stakeholder for us are our customers. And so we think about the fact that we want to be the provider of choice to businesses that share our values. And I will tell you that many, many customers are now choosing to partner with companies that express their values. And so whether that's our consumer customers or it's our B2B customers, what we do in this space matters to them. The larger society is watching. Corporate America is being expected to play a role that perhaps was not the case long ago around social justice, for example. And I think that at Cornell, people are watching beyond the great academic institution that it is, the societal impact that Cornell can have inside the classrooms, outside the classrooms, so important to us. And then when you think about the stakeholders, they include our shareholders, and our investors care deeply. And I think that the investors, myself as an alumni who invests in Cornell, I care. And our investors and many of the investors that are holding corporate America to task. This can't be slogan work for our investors. They're going to ask for the data, and they believe that diversity and inclusion matter in terms of giving them a return on their investment. So we think about it in that way as broadly as we can, and I would just suggest every institution to think about their stakeholders and how they make this come to life for them.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, in organizations, there's a huge level of complexity, and identifying those stakeholders is so important. And at Cornell, we have done that, and we have a variety of stakeholders from our undergraduate students, graduate and professional students, our faculty, our staff, our alumni, our parents, friends, and supporters, as well as the larger Ithaca and Tompkins County community, and the world that we serve, because we do have a land grant mission and an extension mission to serve the greater society at large. So I think that's really key and really important. And it actually leads me to what might be a bit of a thorny question, but I'm sure you've got an answer for it, because I know you do. Is there really a role for everyone in DEI? I've heard this a lot. You'll hear people say that it's for everyone, and we want to be inclusive of all backgrounds, of all identities, that everyone has a place. To you and in the work that you do, how do you actually grapple with that? Do you really mean everyone?
Oh, thanks, Angela. That's probably the most important area I'm spending a lot of time thinking about and working through. And that is, do we really mean everyone? We have 130,000 employees at Verizon around the globe. And you can imagine how diverse all of us are. And frankly, you're hearing me, seeing me. You're attributing certain characteristics to me. She's female. I just talked about being kind of a Brooklynite. I'm a Cornellian. And so I have many, many identities. And so I don't speak on behalf of all Puerto Ricans. I don't speak on behalf of all Brooklynites, all Cornellians. And so there's so much diversity in that 100,000. In one person, there are so many dimensions to that person's experience. I have Magda's view. I don't have the world view. I have Magda's world view. And imagine everybody has their own 130,000 of them, and sometimes multiple views, depending on which vantage point you're looking through, what filter, as a mom, as an employee, and so on. And yet, with all of those life experiences, we talked a moment ago that there is a Verizon culture. There are a set of norms and expectations and behaviors that we expect of each other. And so, although all of us may come to that moment of being a Verizon employee from many, many places and many, many backgrounds, we have a certain set of core values, and those are respect. We'll hold ourselves accountable to being respectful, performance excellence, and integrity are always going to be filters that you add on to whatever that personal set of values you have. Now we have a collective set of values. I will tell you that during these months, probably years, the past 5 years or so, as the larger society, just thinking in the United States for a moment, most specifically, very polarized set of conversations, things that even if we think about the pandemic, that one might not think to be political, have been politicized. Something as simple as wearing a mask or not wearing a mask, getting a vaccine or not getting a vaccine, being anti-racist, suddenly becomes, polarized and politicized. And so that, of course, is in our workplace as well. And so as we have had many courageous conversations meant to really just meet people where they are, we want to not leave any of us where we are. Our credo says our best was good enough for today, tomorrow we'll do better. And so that includes in our learning, how we learn about differences, how we learn about inclusion, how today we have a certain baseline of understanding, and the expectation is we continue to grow. And yet, we have to create a safe space for everyone. Everyone has to be psychologically safe. The conservative and the liberal, whatever groupings we want, whatever labels that we are using to define differences, all of them have to come together and have a space to be heard. And so we have created safe spaces. We've engaged our employee assistance program to create small, intimate support groups for places of healing, places of understanding and sharing. We've also included larger spaces that we call courageous conversations for those people who might not want to be in that small, intimate setting, but also don't want to be necessarily exposed during their journey of learning. And so we really are being very mindful of embracing the fact that we have a lot of diversity in our workplace. We want psychological safety for everyone, and we want to hold everyone to the highest standards of our values at the same time. Sometimes that can feel like it's in conflict, and so we have to make certain that we are able to differentiate a misstep from misconduct, for example. It is quite possible that any one of us, myself included, can say something on this call that could offend someone. And we have to create a space for grace, for learning, for teaching, an openness to saying, that was a misstep. And how do you take that moment to connect with another human being, meet them where they are, and express your lived experience, and listen and learn their lived experience. And that is very important. Misconduct is crossing a line where we have established a certain set of criteria and zero tolerance around, and that's not a misstep. That would be treated as a misconduct and dealt with very liberally.
So I just want to break in a little bit there and just repeat some of what you've said, because we're having a little bit of technical challenge, and I'm just going to call it right out, even though this is live. This is what happens when we do something live. But I want to call a few things that you said to make sure that our audience really heard what you were saying about the difference between a misstep and misconduct, because it's really profound, and I love the way that you share it. So missteps are a natural part of growth, right? It's a natural part of leaning into these really difficult conversations where we're bound to make missteps, right? Because we don't have all of the knowledge. We don't have all of the different lived experiences and perspectives of our colleagues, of our many colleagues. So we're bound to make missteps. But if we don't make those missteps, we're not going to grow. We're not going to learn. We're not going to improve and, learn how to do better the next time we step forward. Versus misconduct, which is stepping over the line, right? Going back to those boundaries and expectations that as an organization that you've set as, this is our standard of conduct. This is how we're going to interact with each other. This is what we expect. And if you step beyond this, that's misconduct. So there's a clear distinction there between the two, one being necessary to growth and helping to provide that space, right? That safe space for people to engage in these conversations without fear and without judgment, but also recognizing that this safe space, in order to maintain that, in order to maintain growth, that not all behavior, not all comments are acceptable if it crosses into that line of misconduct. So thank you so much for sharing that, Magda. I'm going to come back to you, and I'm going to ask my next question for you, which is related, and it's a little bit personal, because we're all on a journey, and we don't get this right. No matter how many years we do this work or how deeply we do this work, I've made missteps, and I'm sure you have too, and you mentioned that. Would you mind sharing with us a misstep that you've made and how you personally engage with that to grow from it and do better the next time?
I am so sorry about the technical difficulties, and thank you, Angela, for your grace and for taking the time for this conversation. I would say that recently there are some areas that are new for me, and those include some of the pronouns, for example. And so as we become more and more inclusive, as we try to understand people's identities and how they want to identify themselves, the they, them has been something new for me. And another example of self-identity is the Latinx term. And so I have had to really make certain that I educate myself. It is my responsibility to understand where this evolution has come from, where it's going, what does it mean, and really taking the time to better understand it. I remember a conversation with our Latinx employees and just sharing with them my perspective. And, it was from a place of, wow, in Spanish, that does not make sense. So Latino and Latina, to me, are Spanish terms, and they are used to go either masculine or feminine. And in that conversation, they're like, yes, but that in fact is the core problem, that we don't want that kind of gender. We want there to be something different than those binary ways of speaking. And so we had a rich conversation about where I was coming from, where they were coming from. And really, these conversations are not about convincing another person, but really attempting to understand another person's point of view. And also creating a space where you can also seek to be understood. And it's not a debate. It's not a win or lose. It's a conversation.
Absolutely. That's so important, that it's about listening for understanding. I know you and I have talked about this and the different intergroup dialogue programs that are available for students and graduate students on campus here at Cornell, where they talk about that, right? The difference between dialogue and debate, and the importance of, knowing what the purpose is, knowing that, when we're having these difficult conversations, it's really about understanding. And it's also, to bring back something you said earlier, Magda, about choice, right? So when you listen for understanding, to see where that other person is coming from, realizing that you then have a choice of how you engage with that person. You can choose to do it in a way that's respectful of them and where they're coming from and their perspective, but still is keeps you within integrity. So, in your experience, Magda, as you're engaging in these conversations, and I know you've had many and they're happening all over your organization, what have you found that really helps people to move into change and move into beginning to incorporate some of the behaviors that will create an inclusive environment?
I think it starts with openness to new information. So change is difficult, and it often is difficult because it's unfamiliar. And so the more that one spends time familiarizing oneself, the more they will progress through the change curve. I think that besides awareness and learning, I think that relationships matter. I think that oftentimes we are, we are a product of our experiences. And so how do we create more diverse experiences for ourselves? How do we create more relationships? I have heard in many of the conversations, wow, I had no idea that you were feeling that way. And this is a conversation very common that I hear an employee say, I would not have known that my Black and African American colleagues were feeling as though they could not share at work what they were hearing in the media and the pain that they were experiencing, that they felt like they just had to come into work the next day as if nothing had just happened. And these are some of the most recent conversations following the racial crisis in the summer, and even most recently during the trial of George Floyd. People are coming to work with heaviness on their hearts. And there was just this sense that I didn't know. And this willingness, now that I do know, to check in on you and to deepen my relationship and my understanding. So it's not just theoretical, getting to understand what's going on by way of educating yourself around unconscious bias or educating yourself about any type of privilege one might have. Those are important. But then you can take that learning deeper by way of truly relating with people from outside of your own lived experience, really making that intentional so that that understanding can happen. And we talked just a little bit ago is just staying open when those conversations don't make sense to you, when you're just really struggling, is to just not pack up and leave the conversation. You might need to stop for that moment and create the space for reflection, but then come back into those relationships and continue that growth in a very personal and intimate way. I think that it helps you in that change to make it personal. It's not just something from afar. There are people in our everyday from whom we can really just ask. At the same time, I will just caution, not to the point of making any particular group of people responsible for your learning journey. I am responsible for my learning journey, but I can't do it alone. And so, Angela, would you be willing to help me understand an experience that is not mine. And Angela may say, frankly, I am tired of talking about my experience. And I can say, okay, right? And find, perhaps another person. We're all living through this and having just a different response to it. So Angela, I don't know if that even came. The other piece is immerse yourself. So that's that relationship, get intimate. Then there are ways of volunteering and just coming into communities and experiences that also, I think, help people make that change. Something that's active, that's tangible. It could be mentoring students on our campus who are different from oneself, or just really, just taking that exposure relationship to a more committed level of action. And sometimes, you were asking about change. It's like, well, that has to happen after the change. But I believe that helps to enable the change, that engagement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that exposure and being open to, like, when you go out there to look for different experiences, really knowing and saying that I'm going to see something different. I don't think people often realize that when they go into this and say, oh, we want people to bring their full authentic selves to work, and realizing that full authentic self is going to be different than your full authentic self, and it's going to have different experiences. And that's what we're asking for. So I think that's a really important point. Now, you've talked a lot about this, right? Increasing exposure, getting engaged and taking actions in that way. Can you tell us more concretely what's happening at Verizon? Can you tell us about some of the initiatives and the good work that you're doing, including some really terrific stuff around race and social justice and the action toolkit that you've built around that?
Absolutely. We have been at this work around equity for a very long time. I started by talking about the fact that indeed I came to work at Verizon, the New York Telephone, because of the commitment to equity. And so it's building on that tradition. And the same is true about our employee resource groups, right? They've been around I've been here 31 years at Verizon, so it's a long time, and they already existed. But just because you had the corporate responsibility initiatives outside of your walls, and just because you had things like ERGs and other programs inside your walls, you have always an opportunity to say what might be better, because we still have work to do. On the diversity front, in terms of our representation, so we have really just doubled down on looking at our data around representation. We have also looked at it across levels, across functions. The world of work is changing. And what will that talent pipeline, internal and external, look like as the new technologies evolve, as the new skills evolve, as the world of work changes and the demands for working remotely increase? How do we really make sure that we're still going to be attractive and able to retain diversity at all levels and across all of our continuously evolving business? So we're just looking at that constantly. We also look at the workplace. What is our data telling us about the employee experience at Verizon? And so these are not new, Angela. These are just kind of making sure that we stick to the fundamentals and that we just build on them. We're just looking at them more often. And so instead of an annual survey, we're doing them quarterly. And we're really checking in and making sure that although we are respecting the anonymity of the respondents, we do disaggregate the data and look at how are women responding. Not only how are women responding, how are Black women responding, how are white women, how, from a 10-year perspective, just to make sure intergenerationally, ethnically, racially, what's the experience like? So we're doing that work. The toolkit that you referred to was something we did launch last summer, where it was clear that conversations around race were not common in the workplace. We were inviting a conversation into the workplace, that belonging, that authenticity that we wanted from everyone, required some guideposts and some resources. And so we made sure that we created a toolkit that was available 24/7 to all of our employees, as one example of a resource to support our employees. But we also doubled down on our people leaders and really began to equip them uniquely. How do they guide these conversations? How do they participate in them? How do they lead them in the workplace? And so we also have, for years, been doing unconscious bias training. Well, that's the awareness stage. Now we were already planning in 2020 to say we need to double down on behaviors, not just building awareness, but really ensuring that people understand it's not enough to know your biases. You must be consciously inclusive. And we ended up modifying the curriculum last summer to say, yeah, it's about being consciously inclusive and anti-racist. And so we just continue to build on the fundamentals, take it deeper and broader, and make sure that we are providing the resources for all employees and then for people leaders who guide those organizations to be able to just continue to build on their learning and to move again from awareness to action.
Yeah, awareness to action. I love that. And I love, the fact that you call out really clearly that conscious inclusion and anti-racism are more than a state of mind. It's a behavior. It's an action, right? It's not just having the awareness around it, but it's actually doing something with it, and acting in alignment with that, so that you actually are creating inclusion and you are creating anti-racist systems and practices. So before we get into questions and comments from our audience, and I hope you are, if you're watching and listening to this conversation, that you're engaging in the chat and get your questions in there, because we're coming to them next. But before we get to that, I do want to ask you what I call my crystal ball question for you. And it's really about, moving forward, what do you believe will drive systemic change in organizations? I know there's a lot of work, we've gone through the awareness phase, and, many organizations are still in that phase. People are looking at data and, large data. How do we measure it? But what do you think really drives systemic change? And what's out there in the future if you look into your crystal ball?
Oh my. I think accountability is super important. And we solve big problems every day as organizations. Cornell, your research, Verizon, its solutions. We need to treat this like a serious problem. The problem being the inability for people of different backgrounds to truly value one another and to optimize our collective humanity. Like, all of our institutions need that unlock, that unleash of potential to happen in order for us to continue to solve bigger problems. And so I just believe that we need to hold ourselves accountable to that. I think we need to be honest with where we are around diversity, equity, and inclusion. We need to challenge our systems and every process that we have on behalf of our employees, our students, our contractors, like just really looking and seeking to just make sure there's access and openness to opportunity. And we need to hold ourselves accountable. Where are we? What are our goals? How do we measure success? And do that the way that we do any other part of our business, right? With measures, with accountability. Now, that's nice, but it's not sufficient. While we do that, we do have to care about something you called earlier in mindset, Angela. Like, how are we thinking about each other? How are we learning about each other? And I think that, you talked about intergroup dialogue a moment ago, and my son experienced that class while at Cornell. And I will tell you that when I listened to him, he learned a lot. And I thank Cornell for the experience and exposure he had to that methodology of listening to understand. Listening to understand. That's not a common mindset. And I think that leaders, to be inclusive leaders and to have cultural competence, which I think is hugely important. Leaders are known if they're followed. You're not a leader if no one's following you. And the world is becoming more and more diverse. And so you really need to be adaptive in order to be able to connect with all kinds of people. And I think that mindset of openness, that willingness to embrace the fact that we don't know it all, that we don't have to either, that we can learn from one another. And so those are just two things. I think that the accountability model's got to be there, and then we have to put in the effort to continuously learn, to continuously stay open, and drive a more equitable world.
That is beautiful. That is beautiful and concise. Accountability, mindset, and openness. That can get us so far. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to pull in a volunteer. Carolyn Chow is on the line. Can you tell us what kind of questions do we have over there coming in on the chat?
Hello, everybody. Some great questions have been coming in, and I'm going to go ahead and start with some sort of the broader questions and narrow it down to some of the more specific questions. But, Rick Weaver shared that I was taught that diversity is like being invited to the party, and inclusion is like being asked to dance. Do you feel that that's a fair general representation of the difference between the two?
Absolutely. I said you could have a seat at the table, but not have a voice at the table. If you're a dancer, you get to go to the party, but not really get to dance. If you want the athletic metaphor, it's kind of, have you been that person that is the last one picked for the team? And oh, by the way, you never get on the field. You just get to be on the bench. And everyone that's on the bench, by the way, has a role to play. But these are all examples, Carolyn, of that way of, yeah, I'm there, but I don't really matter. Another way of thinking about diversity and inclusion that I like is you can count heads, but not every head counts, right? So all of these, I think, can apply.
So powerful. And one of the ones that I love that's an extension of that diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion's being asked to dance, and belonging is playing the music you want to hear, asking about the music you want to hear.
Oh, love that.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
So Charlotte LeBaron asks, seemingly transparency is highly related to the bringing the whole self to work idea. How do you actually go about stimulating transparency in an organization where that's not the current attitude or practice? Like, what does transparency include or exclude?
Well, Angela was saying, bringing your whole self to work, there are maybe some parts of self, right, that don't align with the values. But let's assume that we're picking those parts of ourselves to be transparent that would be welcome. And sometimes if they're not, it's you. And so I can't imagine the energy that one expends covering any part, any dimension of yourself. And so that full transparency is really for you. It's a gift for you so that you can honestly just spend your energy on other things than on figuring out how's Carolyn looking at me, how's Angela, and so I think first you start with it, and it's a gift to those around you. Imagine being that person that doesn't really know the whole story about someone that you go and work with, every day, and they think they know you. And suddenly, what's that about? And, what does that do to your relationship? Also, how does that limit? So there's a limitation you place on yourself because you're covering. There's a limitation that you're placing on relationships because there's not the space for everyone to just be able to understand each other. So it's kind of a gift that keeps on giving when you are willing to lean in. Now, there's also some things that we have to do organizationally to establish the conditions for that to be able to occur. And, part of that is, what is the tone at the top? What are the messages that are going out to the organization about this? The value of psychological safety for all, the value of being able to be your authentic self, and the boundaries that exist also, right? As so many unique individuals, are showing up. And so what is the measure of misconduct? Do people believe that they're safe? What are your systems? Do you have an anonymous hotline in place that people 24/7 in all languages can, so these are the systems and the conditions that an organization puts in place. What's the leadership saying? What systems are in place for you to be able to report a violation? All of those give people the sense like, oh yeah, they really mean it. Does that
absolutely
come close?
I think so.
Am I having technical problems?
No, you hit the mark, Magda. You hit the mark.
Thank you so much, Magda. So Monica Russell is asking, can you speak a little bit more about how you've handled courageous conversations?
Yes. So we have courageous conversations, and they've been going on for years. We then really, about 3 years ago, we started the Courageous Conversations, because think about it. Before George Floyd was murdered, right, we've been at the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion in all of our organizations. But when the world watched that, we realized we've got to do more. And it required that we prepare our employees for those conversations. So a few years ago when we started that, it was not as heated as it became in the summer. And so much pain, so much that was in the media. And so it really was important. And Angela asked earlier about the toolkit and the tools that were made available to help those courageous conversations be productive and welcoming of people who were entering with different life experiences. And so we enhanced our tools that we had for the courageous conversations. And the other piece is also something that we're working on right now. And I talked about the fact that we started with unconscious bias. Then we added to that learning conscious inclusion and anti-racism. And then we added allyship. And so we see that as a journey. And the same is true about the conversations. So you start with the broad, courageous conversations where you're anonymous and you can participate or not, but you're in the experience. The second conversation is called continuing the conversation. And there we actually have members of our employee resource groups and members of the diversity, equity, and inclusion team leading conversations alongside leaders. Because what we want to do is model the behavior for those people who say, I'm ready to move from being anonymous in this conversation to really leading these conversations. I want to apply the toolkit. I want to be more visible on this, but I'm not ready to do it yet. So they come alongside and they're watching. And then the last, the third one, which aligns with allyship, is that action place where it's going beyond the conversation. So it's courageous conversation, continuing the conversation with that partner, and then beyond the conversation, you now start to lead the conversation. But we don't take the training wheels off right away. we have that DE&I coach or ERG coach alongside until that leader really says, okay, I got this. And it's now a part of their daily ability to interact in these conversations and frankly lead them and initiate them.
Yeah, and that's so important, the cyclical aspect of everyday learning in different situations and different circumstances that come up. So we've got Jody, who is an instructional designer who creates online courses for many companies. And so this typically looks like reviewing definitions, reviewing thoughtful scenarios, and then a quiz. Companies do diversity, equity, and inclusion online to save money. And have you seen any online training that got it right?
Oh, we have fantastic instructional designers at Verizon, and they've gotten it right. So we really worked with an organization by the name of Cook Ross. And we worked with Cook Ross when we started the journey about 5 years ago on unconscious bias. And we then did a lot of train the trainer. And so what we wanted to do was to embed the instruction at different points in the employee life cycle. So at the point of onboarding, but also when you become a supervisor or if you're an executive, really tailoring the experience so that everyone is not receiving an online experience. 100% of people will have at least what was just being described, the definitions, the scenarios, and all. But then our instructional designers who know Verizon well and know our culture and are really taking that and designing experiences beyond, the online and just really being able to embed it. We have something called New Leader Academy, where every new people leader goes through. They go through the conscious inclusion, pieces, but they go through it with our own design, with our own instructors now. So I think that there are great partners, but no one knows you better. If I'm maybe there's a Cornell, thumbprint that needs to be on it, even with the best of vendor partners.
And I will get to sit, so thank you, because I will definitely add to that. And I'll say one of the places that's getting it right is, I think, Cornell. Now, we haven't gotten it perfect, right? And there's a difference between getting it right and getting it perfect. But I think with the program that we launched, Advancing DEI at Cornell, which was developed in collaboration with the Department of Inclusion and Workforce Diversity, my department, Organizational Development and Effectiveness, who does all of our leadership training programs, and eCornell, who was doing the instructional design and also facilitating this program for us. We developed a 6-part online series that really is a foundational course. And that I think, that's another piece of it, is the purpose of the online program. It's one component of a multi-pronged approach to training, growth, and development. So the series that we developed really walks people through the mission, vision, values of Cornell, how it's connected to DEI, what social identity means, why we're talking about it in the workplace, and then some basic skills and expectations around inclusion, conscious inclusion, and how to create a sense of belonging in the workplace. So that's foundational. And then, like Magda was saying, embedding it into other areas. So currently we're looking at our leadership programs and making sure that they have more robust DEI components for all of our leaders, embedding it into our performance reviews and performance dialogues, as well as our Inclusive Excellence Academy programming, right? So we're building on this foundational piece, knowing that online is one component of a multi-pronged approach.
Yeah. And if I could add, it's multi-pronged and it has to touch everybody. And when I say that, it's got to be about faculty and students and staff. And we even, take our vendors who are really close vendors. They understand our code of conduct and our values around this. So to the degree that, and I know that academic institutions are different. And I would just say that we are very intentional about making sure that the chairman and the CEO and everyone who's, part of that Verizon community has an appropriate experience that is shared.
Absolutely. Carolyn, I think we have time for one more quick question.
Absolutely. So, this is sort of something that I think, you talked about, in this past hour, and it was really sort of this idea of, engaging in the conversation, reaching out, asking for help and or engaging with others to see if that's something that they could be a part of the learning process. But if you could see people make one change today in terms of their own personal action to move us collectively toward a more inclusive place, and that could be like department, organization, the world, what do you think that would be?
Go out and have a conversation with someone who represents whatever just comes to your mind when I say, who's most different from you? I think that I would encourage people to just go out, break bread in a COVID safe way, and begin your journey to dispelling the myths that we have in our heads about each other and getting closer to each other's humanity. Well, I would love that person to unmute and say, usually when someone asks a question, I don't know if they're allowed to unmute, but maybe Carolyn and Angela, you can add to that, because I can imagine there's so many different responses to that, and I'm sure I didn't nail it.
Yeah, I think you got to, because I think that's one important step, right? To go out there and, it goes back to what you said earlier, Magda, about exposure, right? Getting contact and getting experience around difference, getting comfortable learning and being in a place where you're taking in new information about new perspectives. I think that's really important. Another way to look at it is that one small thing that you can do is different for every person, right? You really have to look at, your strengths, your skill set, your interest, your scope of control and your scope of authority. So if we're looking at it in the workplace specifically, what I'd say is, what do you have control over? And everyone has control over something in their work, whether it's who you're interacting with or the way you're interacting with people. And it could be as simple as saying, you know what? When I say I'm a receptionist, and we're in the COVID world, so we don't have as many, and we don't have many people coming in, but pre-COVID and post-COVID, when we're back together, saying that when people enter, I'm going to greet them with a cheerful hello and sincerely ask how they're doing, or how can I be helpful to you today? That can be and make a huge difference to someone's experience. Think about someone who walks into an office that may be confused. And I've actually heard this story. Staff members have come to me and said, I went into this building and I didn't know where I was going and nobody helped me. They kind of looked at me like I was out of place. And this was a visibly minoritized person. And then someone from your team actually approached me, smiled, and said, can I help you? So small things like that, it's the reverse of a microaggression. It's a micro-affirmation. So what is it that you have in your locus of control to do? Another thing, depending on the work that you do, if you're working with documents, saying, what, the documents I create are going to be accessible documents, right? Meaning that folks with varying abilities are able to access them. And that's the piece that I'm going to do. So it really depends on your interest. I think it can be molded.
That's awesome. That was a very inclusive response.
We try, right, Magda? It's a journey. And we are at the top of the hour, and I just want to give my sincerest gratitude and thanks to you, Magda, for taking the time out of your very busy day to come and share all of your insights and experience and expertise with us. I know that I have found it to be incredibly insightful and enriching, and I hope that our audience has felt the same way. So thank you so much.
Thank you for including me. I think I have a lot to learn from you all, so let's stay connected. Thank you.
Absolutely. Have a good afternoon, everyone.